Hey, how's everybody doing? I'm going to be talking today about the son of perdition mentioned in Second Thessalonians chapter 2. And the thing about this video is I really don't even need the Bible to prove this point. Um, I'm going to read all of chapter 2, and then we'll just kind of break down each verse. But I want to first look at chapter 1 of Second Thessalonians, and we're going to look at verses 3 through 5. And if you look at the first verse, and also at the top of the book, it tells you that this is the second letter of Paul to the Thessalonians. So we know this is Paul speaking. Verse 3 says, "We are bound to thank God always for you, brethren, as it is meet, because that your faith groweth exceedingly, and the charity of every one of you all toward each other aboundeth, so that we ourselves glory in you in the churches of God for your patience and faith in all your persecutions and tribulations that ye endure, which is a manifest token of the righteous judgment of God, that ye may be counted worthy of the kingdom of God, for which ye also suffer." So we see there that Paul is talking to the Israelites that were in that land because they are the ones that are suffering the persecution and tribulations as part of a highest righteous judgment. Now we'll stop there and we'll go over to chapter 2, and we're going to start in verse 1. "Now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Yeshua Christ, and by our gathering together unto him, that ye be not soon shaken in mind, or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter as from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Remember ye not that when I was yet with you I told you these things? And now ye know what withholdeth, that he might be revealed in his time. For the mystery of iniquity doth already work. Only he who now letteth will let, until he be taken out of the way. And then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. Even him whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they received not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned who believed not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness." And we're going to just go ahead and stop there at verse 12. So in the first two verses, Paul brings out that the day of Christ is at hand. And then in verses 3 through 7 is where he talks about the son of perdition, and that son of perdition will be revealed. Now, he also gives some evidence to identify the son of perdition when in verse 4 he says, "Who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God." So, who's done this? Who has exalted themselves above God? And verse 8 also goes on to say that that wicked would be revealed. Now, when you look up the word wicked in the Strong's, it says lawless, not subject to the law, which would be the law covenant that was given to the Israelites. So it's talking about other nations that were not subject to that law covenant. Now, when you look at all the man-made laws in place today, they're all set up to go against God's laws. They say it's okay to eat pork. It's okay to be a homosexual. It's okay to view Sunday as the Sabbath. All these things are in direct conflict with God's laws. Now, I have some information, and this is all stuff that I found online that I want to share with you guys. And as I'm reading this information, I want you to think about it and tell me who this is and if these things that I'm bringing out are not wicked. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about is I got this right out of the Wikipedia. All you have to do is type in search list of wars involving the United States. Now, this just starts in 1774 when the U.S. got its independence from Britain. And that started the American Revolutionary War. Now, there's little parts to wars that are called like military campaigns, still basically the same thing. But for the American Revolutionary War, there was 10 parts that made up that war. Then that lasted until the end of 1783. And then we had 4 wars between that and the War of 1812. The War of 1812 had 11 parts to it. Then we had 3 wars from the end of that until the African slave trade that started in 1819 and ran to 1861. Then there were 11 wars leading up to the Mexican-American War, which started in 1846. And then there was 5 campaigns as part of that war. Now, that ended in 1847, and then the Civil War began in 1861. In those 14 years in between there were 16 wars. That's like more than a war a year. It doesn't even add up. Then at the Civil War, there was 5 parts to the Civil War. Then the Civil War ended in 1865, and from 1865 to World War I, which started in 1917, there was 42 wars in between that time frame of about 50 years. And World War I had 5 campaigns or parts to it. Then we had 3 wars from the end of that until World War II, which started in 1941, ran in 1945, and there was 30 parts to that war, or 30 campaigns. And then that led up to the Cold War, which started in 1947, and that's when the USSR was done away with. And it says that the United States becomes world's sole superpower. Now, the Cold War went from 1947 to 1991, and during this time, there was 15 wars going on. And then the Gulf War started in 1990, and as we all know, since then up until right now, there's just been wars going on constantly. Also, another thing I want to bring out is something called the Tuskegee experiment, or the Tuskegee syphilis experiment is really what it's called. And like I said, this is something you can find in the Wikipedia too. It says the Tuskegee syphilis experiment was an infamous clinical study conducted between 1932 and 1972 in Tuskegee, Alabama, by the U.S. Public Health Service to study the natural progression of untreated syphilis in poor rural black men who thought they were receiving free health care from the U.S. government. The Public Health Service, working with the Tuskegee Institute, began the study in 1932. Investigators enrolled in the study a total of 600 impoverished African American sharecroppers from Macon County, Alabama. 399 who had previously contracted syphilis before the study began, and 201 without the disease. For participating in the study, they were given free medical care, meals, and free burial insurance. They were never told they had syphilis, nor were they ever treated for it. According to the Centers for Disease Control, the men were told they were being treated for, quote, bad blood, a local term used to describe several illnesses, including anemia and fatigue. The 40-year study was controversial for reasons related to ethical standards, primarily because researchers knowingly failed to treat patients appropriately after the 1940s validation of penicillin as an effective cure for the disease. So in 1940, they had a cure for this disease. They had penicillin, and they refused to give it to them. It said by 1947, penicillin had become the standard treatment for syphilis. Choices available to the doctors involved in the study might have included treating all syphilitic subjects and closing the study, or splitting off a control group for testing with penicillin. Instead, the Tuskegee scientists continued the study without treating any participants and withholding penicillin and information about it from the patients. In addition, scientists prevented participants from accessing syphilis treatment programs available to others in the area. The study continued under numerous U.S. Public Health Service supervisors until 1972, when a leak to the press eventually resulted in its termination. The victims of the study included numerous men who died of syphilis, wives who contracted the disease, and then children born with congenital syphilis. Now, here's the sad part, okay? I realize that, yes, this did lead to the establishment of the Office for Human Research Protections, and then it also led to federal laws and regulations for the protection of human subjects, but it should have never even came to that point. If you have a soul, you could never do something like that to another person. Something else that I also want to bring out is this is actually under blackgenocide.org, and then if you search the Negro Project, this goes in to talk about the lady that started birth control and eventually is what we now know as Planned Parenthood. On the crisp fall Columbus Day in 1999, organizers of the Say So March approached the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court. Marchers were protesting the disproportionately high number of abortions in the black community. The high number is no accident. Many Americans, black and white, are unaware of Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger's Negro Project. This was the name of her project. Sanger created this program in 1939 after the organization changed its name from the American Birth Control League to the Birth Control Federation of America. Excuse me. The aim of this program was to restrict the black population under the pretense of better health and family planning. Sanger cleverly implemented her plan. What's more shocking is Sanger's beguilement of black America's creme de la creme, those prominent, well-educated, and well-to-do, into executing her scheme. Some within the black elite saw birth control as a means to attain economic empowerment, elevate the race, and garner the respect of whites. The Negro Project has had lasting repercussions in the black community. We have become victims of genocide by our own hands, cried Hunter. This was one of the protesters at the Say So March. Margaret Sanger aligned herself with the eugenists whose ideology prevailed in the early 20th century. Eugenists strongly espoused racial supremacy and purity, particularly of the Aryan race or the white race. Eugenicists hoped to purify the bloodlines and improve the race by encouraging the so-called fit to reproduce and the unfit to restrict their reproduction. They sought to contain the inferior races through segregation, sterilization, birth control, and abortion. Sanger embraced Malthusian eugenics. Thomas Robert Malthus, a 19th century cleric and professor of political economy, a population time bomb threatened the existence of the human race. He viewed social problems such as poverty, deprivation, and hunger as evidence of this population crisis. According to writer George Grant, Malthus condemned charities and other forms of benevolence because he believed they only exacerbated the problems or just, helped the problems along. His answer was to restrict population growth of certain groups of people. His theories of population growth and economic stability became the basis for national and international social policy. Grant quotes from Malthus' Magnum Opus. And I'm going to go ahead and skip on down to the last paragraph in this section. It says, Sanger illegally operated a birth control clinic in October of 1916 in the Brownsville section of Brooklyn, New York, which eventually closed. The clinic serviced the poor immigrants who heavily populated the area, those deemed unfit to reproduce. So basically, she started birth control and abortion as a means to do away with the black race, those that they deemed unfit to reproduce. Now, I also want to get into talking about AIDS. I know they like to tell people that, oh, AIDS started in Africa and all of this, but if you research it, you will find out that that's actually not true. And you can just do a Google search and just type in AIDS, man-made disease, and all of this stuff will pop up. This one I have right now is from actually a website called WW3, talking about World War III, talking about AIDS is a man-made disease to reduce population. And the first part of it brings out, back in 1976, the following ad began appearing in New York newspapers. So this was an actual ad in New York papers. It said, last chance for gay men to join the hepatitis B vaccine program. A sexually transmitted disease. Enrollment closes in June, after which the vaccine may not be available for several years. Take the free blood test to determine your hepatitis B status and eligibility for the program. It says over 1,000 gay men took the free vaccination at a time when there was no such disease as AIDS. They got this vaccine. AIDS had not even been discovered yet. Then by 1978, the infection began popping up all over the gay community. Strangely enough, it was predominant among the volunteers who had taken the free hepatitis B vaccine. Within 5 years, 60% of these men were infected with HIV. It goes without saying that you should avoid any government-sponsored vaccine program, no matter how noble the cause may seem. That's why you see them all the time talking about, oh, go get your flu shot and all of this. I absolutely refuse to do it. The program had been repeated the next year in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and as in New York. Shortly after the vaccination for hepatitis B, the West Coast volunteers also began presenting with symptoms of AIDS. In Africa, in 1977, a free vaccination against smallpox was offered to the black citizens of the countries with, quote, population problems. The cost was borne by the United States health agencies as a humanitarian gesture. Again, within 5 years, over 60% of the recipients presented with the HIV virus, and today, well over 20 million face deaths from AIDS. There are some who say that the AIDS virus originated from the Hillman green monkeys of Africa. Of course, there is never any explanation as as to how the virus then got from these green monkeys in Africa into the blood of the East and West Coast gay males. And no word as to what the supposedly AIDS infected monkeys were doing between 1960 and 1978. Their kidneys were being used for vaccine manufacturers. And where in the world did the AIDS virus hide during all that time? Now, I have one other article. This is on Shirley's. I'll put the website up here so you guys can see it. It's Shirley's Wellness Cafe, and it goes in to talk about a number of books and articles that have been written on AIDS actually being a man-made disease. The first one is State Origin, Evidence of the Laboratory Birth of AIDS, and it's by Boyd Ed Graves. It says, author Boyd Ed Graves has spent the last 10 years tracking the origin of AIDS through a densely covered propaganda trail of the highest deception. Dr. Graves' work offers the world a look behind the AIDS curtain and offers our generation the first real opportunity to close the darkest chapter in human history. As evidence, Dr. Graves provides the irrefutable missing link, the AIDS research logic flow chart. It is the linkage of over 20,000 scientific papers which conclusively prove a candidate virus was developed and mass-produced. The creation, production, and proliferation of AIDS is the ultimate assault on a social fabric woven in democracy. Here, Boyd Ed Graves shares some of the court documents and correspondence in response to the world's most deadly ethnic cleansing experiment. His 1999 flowchart discovery has been authenticated by medical and scientific doctors around the world. The critical insights now being unlocked by the 30-year-old secret U.S. AIDS flowchart have firmly established the genocide blueprint as the greatest document find of the century. The shocking conclusions of Dr. Graves' research has resulted in the landmark case seeking global AIDS apology. And there was actually a court case versus the President of the United States, and it was in the U.S. Supreme Court. The evidence of the laboratory birth of AIDS should be required reading for the world to ensure we establish a firm foundation to never again allow the greatest democracy in the history of the world another opportunity to masquerade. The AIDS Holocaust has an activist. It is Boyd Ed Graves, and this is his story. There is another report entitled Who Murdered Africa by Dr. William Campbell Douglas. He wrote that HIV was finally produced or genetically engineered in 1974 after having been predicted and requested. He tells us that the AIDS virus by the WHO, or the World Health Organization, was not just a diabolical scientific exercise that got out of hand. It was a cold-blooded, successful attempt to create a killer virus which was then used in a successful experiment in Africa. African AIDS was a result of the smallpox eradication vaccine program conducted by the WHO during the 1970s. It was not an accident, it was deliberate. And there's also another book. This has a lot of great information, and I would be on here all night trying to share it with you guys. But there's also a book, The Secret Origin of AIDS, Facts, Fallacies, and Conspiracy Theories by Alan Cantwell. And these are all doctors. But it also goes in to talk about other things. There is something I found on here, and they have it on YouTube also. You can just type in the search Bayer, the aspirin company, that's spelled B-A-Y-E-R, was actually selling AIDS-infected drugs. And like I said, you can find that on YouTube. Just search it, Bayer sells AIDS. And it also brings out that, they try to tell you too that HIV virus gives you AIDS, but they're actually finding out that that is not true too. It says HIV equals AIDS, fact or fraud. A shocking documentary that exposes HIV/AIDS as a deceptive and deadly scam. One of the most powerful video documentaries of our time boldly reveals the modern medical industrial complex's dire descent into utter corruption. This feature length expose explains exactly how the $300 billion AIDS fraud began, why HIV cannot be the cause of AIDS, what the real causes could be, and who manipulates the public's good intentions while poisoning hundreds of thousands with toxic drugs that cause the very disease they are supposed to prevent. This is a systematic dissection of the HIV/AIDS machine and how they hijacked a program designed to fight a worldwide plight of human suffering and drove it down the road to hell. Yet this program offers hope, inspired by the courage and articulate arguments of a group of growing voices, internationally challenging HIV/AIDS hysteria. And it also even goes in to talk about how that the vaccines that they're giving your children, when you have children in this day and age, they have to go to the doctor, they have to get these shots and these vaccinations before they can even start school. And now they're finding out that these vaccines that they're giving your children are actually harming them. And that's why, thankfully, I don't have any children, and I don't plan on having children in this wicked system. So this these things that I brought out are not even a quarter of the atrocities that have been committed. But when you hear about these things, there's no way that you can sit here and say that's not wicked. It is absolutely wicked. And if you've noticed, all these atrocities that I read about have been committed by the so-called white race because they have taken on the spirit of Satan. And that's why a lot of times you will hear the Hebrew Israelites call the white man the devil. They're not saying that he is Satan himself, but they're under his control because they have taken on that spirit. And that's what was in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 9 and 10, when it said, even him whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they received not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And that's exactly that information that I just shared with you. It says power and signs, lying wonders, deceivableness. That's what they're doing to the people. That is what they're doing to us. They're telling us one thing, oh, this is good for you. You need to take this and that. But it's actually things that are killing you. And on top of this, Paul does bring out what's going to happen to the son of perdition. Let's go back to chapter 1 of 2 Thessalonians, and we'll read verses 6 through 9. It says, seeing it is a righteous thing with God to recompense tribulation to them that trouble you, and to you who are troubled, rest with us, when the Lord Yeshua shall be revealed from heaven with his mighty angels, in flaming fire, taking vengeance on them that know not God, and that obey not the gospel of our Lord Yeshua Christ, who shall be punished with everlasting destruction from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of his power. And then we're also going to skip back over to chapter 2 and read verses 11 and 12. And for this cause God shall send them strong delusion that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned who believed not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. So we see that the son of perdition will be destroyed. But did you also notice that verse 11 says the Most High would send them strong delusions so that they may believe a lie? And verse 12 says that those that do not believe the truth but take pleasure in unrighteousness, they're already damned. So if you are not believing the truth, that the so-called black race are the true Israelites, then you're taking pleasure in unrighteousness and you're already damned. And those of you on here making racist comments, then you're not accepting the love of this truth. And it's actually the Most High that is giving you these strong delusions so that you continue to believe this lie. And one thing that you have to realize is Christian churches out here today are actually set up to keep people in darkness. And that is something I will be discussing in my next video. So I appreciate everybody for watching, and take care.